There once lived a woman named Nancy. She was known in many places for her wealth, her beauty, and her kindness. People used to say her smile could light up a whole room, and her heart was softer than any pillow. Nancy had everything. Her husband was a successful businessman, her son was smart and full of dreams, and she had a mansion that looked like a palace from the sky. Her company was worth billions, and she had more money than she could ever spend in 10 lifetimes. But one day, everything changed. It was a rainy afternoon. The kind where the sky cried so much it made you feel sad for no reason. Nancy's husband and only son were driving home from a weekend trip. Their car skidded off the road and crashed into a tree. The police said they died instantly. That was the day Nancy's world fell apart. From that moment on, money meant nothing to her. Her mansion became a cold prison. Her business meetings felt empty. Her laughter stopped. No party, no friend, and no luxury could fill the hole that had been ripped into her heart. Years passed, and people slowly forgot about the woman with the warm smile. Nancy stopped showing her face in public. Rumors spread that she had gone mad. Some said she had moved to another country. But none of that was true. Nancy was still there. She just didn't care anymore. Every night, she stared at her husband's picture. Every morning, she walked past her son's empty room. Her heart was heavy, but in the silence of those lonely years, she came to a decision. She would give everything away. Not to charity. Not to distant family members who only cared about her fortune. But to someone who deserved it. Someone kind, humble, and honest. Someone who wouldn't use the money for selfish things. She knew that power and wealth could turn a good person into a greedy monster. She had seen it happen many times. If she was going to give her life's work to someone, she had to be sure. So Nancy made a plan. She took off her diamonds, left her mansion, and dressed in old clothes. She wore a wig, darkened her skin slightly with makeup, and gave herself a new name, Miss Ella. She got a job at a small, dusty eatery in the middle of the city. Nobody there knew who she really was. To them, she was just a tired old woman who served food and cleaned tables. The work was hard. The pay was poor. But Nancy had a purpose now. Every day, she watched people closely. How they talked. How they treated strangers. How they looked at someone like her, a poor waitress with wrinkled hands and slow steps. Most people ignored her. Some insulted her. Others yelled at her for no reason. They laughed behind her back, called her useless, and even threw food at her once. Still, she remained calm. She was used to pain now. And deep down, she believed there was still good in the world. But after months of disappointment, even her hope began to fade. Day after day, she met people who only cared about themselves. Her heart began to feel cold again. She wondered if she had made a mistake. Maybe there was no one left who deserved her empire. Maybe she should just give everything to charity and disappear. Then one cloudy afternoon, something changed. 2 young black men walked into the eatery. They looked tired, worn out, and a little hopeless. Their clothes were old, and their shoes were dusty. They sat at a corner table, their heads hanging low. Nancy noticed them the moment they walked in. There was something different about them. Not their looks, but their eyes, full of pain, but also full of something else, strength. Nancy moved closer without being noticed and began to clean a nearby table. She listened as they spoke in low voices. They were talking about rejection. about how every job interview they had gone to ended the same way. One of them, the taller one, said he had top grades and good skills, but nobody would give him a chance. The other said they were always the last to be called, and the first to be turned away. They believed it was because of the color of their skin. Nancy's heart sank. She could feel their frustration. Their words reminded her of her own son, who once said he wanted to change the world. She felt a spark in her chest. It had been so long since she felt anything at all. Before she could say a word, her manager called her over. A table of 4 loud men had just arrived and were waiting to order. She walked over, keeping her head down. The men were rude from the start. They made fun of her voice, snapped their fingers at her, and accused her of being too slow. One of them spilled water on purpose and laughed. Nancy bowed her head, trying not to cry. She turned to walk away, tears already forming in her eyes. That was when she heard a chair scrape behind her. The 2 young men stood up. They walked straight to her and told the men to stop. They didn't shout. They didn't fight. But they stood tall, calm, and firm. They told the group it was wrong to treat people that way. That everyone deserved respect. The entire eatery fell silent. Nancy couldn't believe it. No one had ever stood up for her since she started working there. She looked at them, and for a second, she saw her son again. Brave. Kind. Strong. The manager rushed over and asked what was going on. The loud men complained, pointing fingers at the 2 young men. Without asking any questions, the manager told all 3 of them to leave. He said they had caused enough trouble. Nancy was shaking. She couldn't let them just walk out. As they left the door, she wiped her eyes and ran after them. She handed them a small piece of paper. On it was an address. Her real address. She told them, with soft words, to come and see her in a few days. Then she turned and walked away before they could say a word. Philip sat on the edge of his bed, the small piece of paper clutched tightly in his hand. The address felt like a whisper of hope and a shout of danger all at once. He showed it to Billy, whose eyes widened as he traced the lines with his finger. They both remembered how they had defended the old waitress in the restaurant, how their voices had been the only ones raised for fairness. Now a name they did not know and a place they had never heard of called them. That night neither of them slept. They thought of stories they had heard about traps and strangers with strange offers. They wondered if this could be a trick to punish them for causing a scene. But each time they looked at one another, they saw the same spark of courage that had driven them to stand up for a stranger. They knew they owed it to themselves to find out. At dawn, they made their decision. They dressed in their best clothes, the ones they had saved for special occasions. Their hearts pounded as they stepped onto the street, leaving behind the small apartment where they had shared so many dreams and so many disappointments. They walked side by side, shoulders straight, heads held high despite the fear that danced in their chests. The road to the address led them through winding lanes and past tall hedges. At last they saw a gate of wrought iron, its bars curling like vines. Beyond it lay a long driveway shaded by old oaks whose branches arched overhead. The mansion stood at the end like a sleeping giant, its white walls glowing in the morning sun. Philip and Billy paused at the gate, both feeling as though they had stepped into another world. They walked up the stone steps and knocked on the heavy wooden door. It opened before they could think twice. There she stood, no longer the tired, awkward waitress they had met. Nancy was dressed in a gown of deep green that shimmered like a forest at dusk. Her hair fell in soft waves, and her eyes held both warmth and sadness. She welcomed them with a gentle nod and a slight smile that made their hearts ache with relief. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and fresh flowers. Tall windows looked out onto gardens that stretched farther than the eye could see. Nancy led them down a long hallway into a study filled with books, paintings, and a desk covered in papers. Everything felt both grand and peaceful, as if the room had been waiting for this moment. Nancy spoke softly about her life before the accident. She told them how she had lost her husband and son, how every day had been an empty echo of the one before. She spoke of her decision to find someone worthy of her empire, someone who would use power with kindness. Then she explained how Philip and Billy had restored her faith in humanity with their courage and respect. She said she wished to hand everything over to them. Philip and Billy stared at each other in disbelief. Neither could find the words to speak. They felt a rush of fear, of joy, of shame at being so unworthy, and yet a spark of excitement at the chance to build something new. Their hearts beat loud in the quiet room. Finally, Philip bowed his head in gratitude. Billy placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. They both agreed to accept the offer, to learn all they could, and to honor the trust Nancy had placed in them. Nancy's smile grew brighter, as though a flower had opened after a long winter. She told them that their training would begin the next morning, that they would learn every part of the business, from the smallest detail of accounts to the grand vision of leadership. She led them to the window where the sun was setting, painting the sky in gold and purple. In that moment, Philip and Billy knew their lives had changed forever. The first morning of training arrived with a gentle breeze and soft light. Philip and Billy rose early and met Nancy in the grand hall. She led them through rooms filled with maps, ledgers, and old letters. She showed them factories where workers made clothes and shoes. She showed them farms where crops grew under careful watch. She showed them schools that Nancy had built so children could learn. Every corner of the empire carried her hope and her grief. Philip and Billy listened closely. They learned how to read the ledgers. They learned how to talk to managers and workers. They learned how to make decisions that balanced profit with kindness. Each lesson felt heavy and bright at the same time. They knew they held a great gift, and they wanted to honor it. But not all in the empire welcomed them. In the factory yard, a tall man in a crisp suit watched them with cold eyes. He was Nancy's chief advisor, a man who spoke little but watched much. Philip felt the man's gaze as they walked by. Billy heard whispers that the man feared losing his power. The two young men exchanged worried glances. They had come to learn and to serve, but now they faced a challenge they had not expected. One night, as the moon cast long shadows across the gardens, Philip could not sleep. He slipped from his room and wandered through the silent halls. In the study, he found a half-open drawer and papers tucked behind the ledgers. He saw strange numbers and secret notes that spoke of hidden bank accounts and silent partners. He knew at once that something was wrong. He woke Billy with a gentle shake. They crept back to the study together. Under the moonlight they spread the papers on the desk. The documents showed that the advisor had been moving money out of the empire. They had been planning to take control once Nancy was gone. Worse still, the papers hinted that the advisor had been involved in the accident that had taken Nancy's family. He had hired the driver to cause the crash. A chill ran down their spines. The empire they loved was stained with betrayal. They looked at each other, fear and resolve mixing in their hearts. They had to act, but they had to be wise. If they made a wrong move, the advisor could destroy them both. The next day, During a meeting in the Great Hall, Nancy asked for their thoughts on expanding into a new market. The advisor began to speak first, his voice calm and smooth. Philip rose and spoke of honesty and care for the workers. Billy added that a leader must protect the people who built the empire. The advisor frowned and tried to interrupt, but Nancy quieted him with a single nod. In that moment, the two young men felt strength they had never known before. After the meeting, Nancy invited Philip and Billy to walk in the garden. She spoke of her loss and her fear that her empire would crumble if she chose the wrong heirs. She said that she had felt a darkness growing in the heart of her company. Philip and Billy looked at each other. Then Philip reached into his pocket and pulled out the papers. He placed them gently on a garden table. Nancy's face grew pale. She read the words by the light of a lantern. When she looked up, tears filled her eyes. She said that she had suspected the advisor for a long time but had no proof. She thanked Philip and Billy for their courage. Then she stood tall and spoke of justice. She said the advisor would face the truth and that they would set things right. That evening, in the Grand Hall, Nancy called a gathering of all her managers and partners. The advisor stood at the front, his face proud. Nancy spoke of loyalty, kindness, and truth. She told everyone that she had chosen two heirs who cared more for people than for power. She named Philip and Billy as her successors. Then she revealed the papers. Gasps filled the hall as the advisor's crimes were read aloud. He tried to speak, but no one listened. Guards escorted him away. In the weeks that followed, the empire changed. Philip and Billy worked side by side with Nancy. They visited factories and farms. They talked to workers and managers. They learned the names of children in the schools and the dreams of farmers in the fields. They made plans to share profits with the people who made the empire strong. They set up scholarships and new clinics. They opened their hearts to the world. Nancy watched them with pride. She saw in them the kindness of her husband and the courage of her son. She felt her own heart grow lighter each day. The mansion no longer felt like a prison. The gardens no longer whispered of loss. Instead, they sang of hope. On a bright morning, Nancy invited Philip and Billy to her study. She placed 2 pens on her desk. With a gentle smile, she asked them to sign the papers that made them billionaires and heirs to the empire. Philip and Billy knelt, placed their hands on the desk, and signed their names. They felt the weight of their new lives, heavy with promise and responsibility. When the last stroke was made, Nancy closed the book and stood. She wrapped her arms around them both. She said that her joy had returned at last. She said that they had healed her heart. Philip and Billy felt tears on their cheeks. They had found family in the most unexpected place. Years later, the empire thrived under the care of the 2 young men. Factories hummed with life. Farms flourished. Schools blossomed with laughter and learning. Philip and Billy became known not just for their wealth but for their kindness and their fight for justice. And Nancy, the waitress who had lost everything, found her greatest happiness in seeing her empire grow with love. She spent her days in the gardens, listening to children play and birds sing. She knew that true wealth was not counted in coins but in the hearts that beat with hope and courage. Thus ends the story of the waitress who helped 2 black boys become billionaires. A story of loss and renewal, of shadows and light, and of how a single act of kindness can change the world forever.